Hi, this is Lee. I had posted on a couple of boards a hack that I found for getting the Cricut um, to be able to do a print and cut bigger than the size that Cricut allows, which is something like 6.75 by 9.25. If you use Cricut, you're probably familiar with this. So I had been getting into sublimation printing and trying to use Caesar Easy Subli to make t-shirts. And for making a t-shirt, often you need a print that's bigger than what Cricut will allow. So I had found this guy on YouTube, Eric M. Boyd, and he has, I'll put a link to this because he has a lot of good, like maybe about 4 videos showing you how to trick your Cricut to cut bigger than it will allow. And what he's using it for is to cut full page stickers, which I have done also, and I love that, being able to do that. But I wanted to show you how I do it with a couple of different changes because I am using the Caesar Easy Subli on a wide format printer to print out large prints. And you can use this technique to cut those out as well. And I just use a couple of different modifications because sometimes I'm using a page size that's not exactly 8.5 by 11. And it's been working out pretty well. And I just wanted to show you how I do that. But I will put the link to his because they're definitely worth looking through to see the way that he does it. And between the two of us, and there's a couple of other people doing it too, you hopefully will be able to figure out how to put something together that allows you to do this. Okay, so as you guys know, like here, this is a picture that my son drew because I didn't want to use anything that might be copyright. So I just took this picture my son drew and got rid of the background, and I have got that actually on my Google Drive, and I'll put links so you guys can actually play with the exact same picture that I'm using. So you know that if I was to try to print and cut this, I've got it at 9.7 by 8. And if I try to print that, if I say make it, it says that's incompatible. And I see this little exclamation mark here. And it says the image is too large, reduce image size. Okay, so I cannot print this and cut it on the Cricut. However, I can trick my Cricut to print it. I print it using a different photo program, and I will just have Cricut cut out the shape. And I have to tell the Cricut with registration marks where to cut because it's not going to have a picture to go by. I have to tell it that. But it's actually pretty easy, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Okay, so I'm going to go to Photoshop and excuse me, I have a cold. You will need some other sort of photo editing program. You could use Photoshop, Photoshop Elements, GIMP. There's probably several more of varying costs. Photoshop is probably the most expensive. I use it for a lot of other things too, so it's worth it for me to get it. The directions, the way that I'm going to do it here in Photoshop would probably be very similar in Photoshop Elements. But for other programs, you'd have to figure out how to do these steps, but they all should be fairly easy. Okay, so here is the picture that my son drew, and we're calling him the Frog Prince. And you can see that I have cleaned this up so it has no background. It is a PNG image, and you can see by the gray and white checkered background that it's got a transparent background. If your image is not like that, you'll have to do some additional cleanup. You don't necessarily have to have a transparent background because you can use the cleanup on Design Space to clean up a solid background. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do, because this does not have much of a border around it, it's cropped down exactly to the size of the picture, I'm just going to increase my canvas size to give me a little more room. So to do that, I'm going to go to Image, Canvas Size. I've got this relative box checked, so it's going to increase my canvas size based on the size it is now. So I'm going to tell it to increase it by 1 inch on the width and 1 inch on the height. So that'll give it a 1/2 inch border all the way around. Okay, so there he is. I've got a little room to work. Now you'll see in my what I'm showing you how to do here is to cut one out like this, and he has got a white border around him. Now you can use this method to do a bleed That's a little more steps, and I'll show you maybe how to do that in a different video. To keep this simple, I'm just going to show you how to do a white background, a white bleed around the image. Okay, so to do that, we're first going to click on the magic wand tool here, and we're going to click on this blank space out here to select everything but the frog. This is just the easiest way to select the frog because he's all different colors. So now I have selected the blank space. I'm going to go up to select and inverse to select the exact opposite of the blank space, which is the frog. Okay, so there he is. You can see the little dotted line around him. He is selected perfectly. I am now going to go to select, modify, and click expand. I'm going to expand that selection. And for this particular image, I'm going to expand it by 40 pixels. Okay, now you can see that that selection has increased. And because I've done this before and I know that the selection was a little bit angular, it had like some little angles and stuff in it, I'm going to go up to select, modify, smooth, and smooth that out by about 15 pixels to make it less, it had like some points, it was a little choppy. Alright, now I'm going to add the white in there. You could just click on your paint bucket and fill that with white, but I'm going to add another layer underneath the frog. So I'm going to go up to Layer, New, Layer. I'm going to call that Shadow. Okay, now I've got a shadow layer right now. It's on top of the frog. I'm going to click and drag that to move it behind the frog. And then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to switch my colors. Right now black is my foreground and white is my background. So I'm just going to click that to switch those. And then I'm going to choose the paint bucket and I'm going to fill that selection with white. So let me see, I'm going to unselect now. If I zoom in, oh, my Photoshop's running slow because I'm doing the video at the same time. Okay, now it is zoomed in some and you can see that I have a nice white outline around the frog. Okay, so now what I want to do, I want to add some registration marks. The registration marks will help us keep our image and the image that we're going to do an outline, import an outline to Design Space, and we want that outline to be the exact same size as the size that we're printing. Now I haven't discussed resolution or the size right now. If I go up to image, image size, you can see that this image right now is 11.63 inches wide and 9.75 inches tall. And its resolution is 300 pixels per inch. Now you will want to keep in mind when you're doing big stuff like this to put on a shirt or whatever, you want to make sure that your resolution is not too low. 300 is pretty good. Okay. So now what we want to do is add some registration marks in each corner. There's a couple of ways to do that. Basically, we want to add some rectangles in every corner. And you can use the rectangle tool here to draw a rectangle. You have to worry about what color it is. What Eric has done in his videos is he uses the selection tool right here, the little selection tool, and he changes to style fixed size, and then you can adjust how big you want your selection box to be. For this I've got it 0.4 inches by 0.4. If I click, it makes a little selection box right there. I can use the paint bucket to fill that with a color, but first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create another layer so that I can move these around without moving the frog around. So I go to Layer, New. I can name this Registration. Okay, so there is my new layer, registration marks. That's selected, and now I'm going to change my colors here. I'll switch that back to black. Click on the paint bucket, and I'll fill that registration mark in, my little selection box in with black. It doesn't have to be black. You could use a different color. All right, now I'm going to come up here and deselect fixed size so I can get rid of that selection box. And now, if I'm still on this layer and I've got that selected, I can move it around. I want to move it up to the corner. I can move it manually because Photoshop has these little guidelines that help you get it exactly right. Or I can use these tools up here, the alignment tools. I can align to the left side of the page and align to the top side of the page. Now I want to make another little square the same exact size over in this corner. A handy feature with Photoshop is you do hold down Control Alt and then click and drag an object and it will make a copy of it. You could just draw it again if your photo editing program doesn't have something like that, or if you don't know how to do it. So now this one has made itself on a new layer, and we can just click the alignment tools. Let's see. Oh, Photoshop. There it goes. Okay. Now I've got those two, registration mark copy and registration mark. I'm just going to merge down. So I'll go to Layer, Merge Down. That merges whatever layer you have selected and the next layer under it. So now those two are both on the same layer. And I can just do the same thing, Control Alt, click and drag. And now I've got another copy of those two, and I can align them to the bottom of the page. If my Photoshop will cooperate with me. Okay, there we go. Now I can merge those two down, Layer, Merge Down. Now all of my registration marks are on the same layer. My frog is on a layer, and the shadow is on a layer. Okay, so it's pretty much ready to go. We want to save this as a PNG image. So File, Save As. Okay, we'll call this Frog Prints for print. And then down here, change it to PNG. That will flatten all of your layers, but still leave it as a transparent background. Okay. So now the thing to do is decide how big do you want to print this. Now I could print this on my large format printer for a shirt, but I don't really want to do that for the purposes of this demonstration. So I'm just going to print this on my laser printer on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. So my laser printer, I have to have the sides I have to have a little bit of a margin around it. So I am going to change the size of this to a height of 8 exactly. Okay. All right. I'm going to save that again. Where did I put him? I have to save as a PNG. So there he is. I'm just going to save that again. All right. Now, if I go to print this, I go to File, Print. I'm printing it on my Dell laser printer. And here's a preview of my page. And you can see that it fits on there. It has to have a little bit of a border around it. When you go to print, you want to make sure to check on your program. It should have something that tells you about the scale. You want to make sure the scale is set to 100%. You don't want it scaled anything. You don't want it to fit to media. You don't want to have it bigger or smaller or anything. You want it to print as exactly the same size as you have when you go up to image size. We want it to be exactly 8 inches tall. So just make sure when you print that you're printing it at exactly the size that you have specified on your photo editing program. All right, now that we have that saved, let's go to Design Space. I'm going to get rid of that. And now we're going to upload that image that we just made. Frog Prints Print PNG. We just made that. Upload it into Design Space. It says, wow, that's large. It may take a minute. That's okay. All right, now we're just going to upload this as simple. You don't have to do complex because we're not actually going to be printing it from Design Space. We're just going to be cutting an outline. So simple, and I say continue. All right, he's kind of big, so I can reduce him down. You can see the colors aren't right, but it doesn't matter. You've got your registration marks and you've got the border, so you say continue. All right, now here, save as a print and cut. Normally that's what you would do, but in this case we're just going to save it as a cut image, just the outline of the frog. And I say save. Okay, now I'm going to select that and put that on my canvas. All right. Now, you are going to have to change the size of this because usually when it imports to Design Space, the size is a little wonky. So here it's showing that as 11.5 by 9.64. Let's go back to Photoshop and check our image size. I'm printing it 9.543 by 8. I'll just copy that 8, go back over to Design Space and paste in 8 as the height. Now let's check and make sure our width is the same, 9.543. 9.543. It's exactly the same. Okay, so when you print this, it's going to print exactly the same size as what you're telling Cricut to cut here. I'm going to change the color of this so we can see this better on the print screen, on the Make It screen. So now if I go to Make It, you can see this is exactly how it's going to cut on your mat. And when Cricut cuts, you know that you can only do, even though the mat goes out to 12, you can only cut 11.5 because it gives you a 0.25 inch border on each side. So you can see that this is going to start cutting 0.25 inches from this side and 0.25 inches from the top. So I will tell you what to do. I'm going to have to get off of the computer and switch to a video so you can see what I'm doing, but I'll show you how to now go ahead and cut this. Okay, so I will be back. Alright, so here's the frog, and like I said, we're just going to take an X-Acto knife and a ruler, and I'm just going to trim on this side. I'm going to trim on the top and on the left hand side. And what I do is I just line the ruler up. I'm going to use the shorter one. Line the ruler up exactly with these marks. And the closer you are with the marks, the more accurate your cut's going to be. And then just trim that edge off. And then I'll do the same with this edge. You don't have to trim the other edges. You can if you want to. The way Eric, whose videos I linked earlier, the way he does it is he trims, he doesn't trim all the sides. He uses just an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. But doing it this way, you can use irregular size of paper. So if you're using some sort of substrate and you're trying to save it and not waste your materials, then you can just print it out exactly the size you want. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to Design Space, and I'll show you how to set up the canvas to cut this. So earlier we had uploaded this to Design Space and set the size so that it's exactly the same size as what we printed. And I showed you that if we go to Make It, it's going to cut on the mat and leave this 1/4 inch border on the sides. So the first thing we're going to do is to set up a rectangle. So I'm just going to hide our frog. And I actually had already put a rectangle in here, but I'll delete it and just do it again. So what we're going to do is on the mat, we're going to put a piece of 12 by 12 scrapbook paper, and we're just going to cut it right around that top and the left-hand side so that it gives us a border to line things up with. So I will just insert a square, and then I will change the width of it to 11.5, and the height, I got to unlock it. I'll change the height to 12. 12, I'll do 12.5. Okay? And now, when I send this to the mat, it's going to cut a big square out of the mat, out of the piece of scrapbook paper that I put on there. Now, I'm going to take my scrapbook paper and I'm going to trim it down to like 11.5 inches, so it's just going to be open on that side. So I'll go to the camera now and I will show you that. Alright, so I've got my mat here, and I've got this piece of scrapbook paper that I trimmed to an 11.5 on one side and just left it 12 inches on the other. And I'm just going to put this on my mat. And I'm going to use my little squeegee to make sure it's pressed down. So now when I cut my rectangle, it should cut all along this side, all the way down this side, and around, but there's no paper there, so it's not going to cut there. Now, when you're loading this up, for the purpose of your cut, put your mat in the same place every time. So I'm going to push my mat all the way over. Let me adjust the camera. So I'm going to push the mat all the way over against this stop over here before I send it in. And then when I go to cut my frog, I'm going to do the same thing. All right, so now we're going to make our rectangle. it tells me one of my images is larger than an 11.5, so I have to use a long mat, which I have. So I just say okay, continue. Okay, now I'm going to cut this out of light cardstock. All right, so I'll just tell it to go. Unload my mat, and I'll just take off this piece here, and it's a nice big piece of cardstock, so I can use that again for something else. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to line up my frog exactly with this border that I just cut. So I'm just going to come in here, and because I trimmed, the Cricut's going to know that it's going to cut at exactly the right place. So, and cutting that border with the cardstock makes it a lot easier to line that up. Okay. All right. And I'll tell it to finish that cut. And I'll hide my square and show my frog. All right, then tell it to make that. Okay, so you can see that exactly where I've got this lined up is where it's going to cut. So I'll just say continue. And again, I'm using cardstock, so use whatever material is appropriate. I'm just going to feed this in like you would normally do. And again, making sure I have it in the same place. I've pushed it all the way up against that stop. And I will just tell it to go. And so as far as the Cricut knows, it is just cutting a blank piece of paper, but it should cut it in the shape that corresponds with the frog. And it will cut the registration marks also. Now it's going to cut the other registration marks, so I'll just pause it because I don't care if it cuts those. And eject my mat. And then you can see that it did a really good job cutting out around the frog. And so that is just, that's how I do that. And you can get your Cricut to cut out something bigger than 6 3/4 by 9 1/4. You could cut this out of Caesar Easy Weed, or you could cut it out of your inkjet iron-on transfer paper. And that's it. Hope that helps you. Please feel free to ask me any questions.